Oh my god, I've waited so long to actually film this and introduce this. I'm so excited and I really hope you'll like it. Hello and welcome to my channel, The Danish Readaholic. My name is Silke, and today I will be introducing kind of like a new series, or hopefully it will be a new series, that I have called Bake Books. The idea of it is that I bake something and then I will film whilst doing it, doing some sped up clips of me baking, and then afterwards I will sit down with whatever I made and talk a little bit about books with you. Hopefully you'll like it, and hopefully I can get the formatting to work. This is the first time I'm trying something like this, so bear with me. Since I am starting out this time, I wanted to do something that I knew already how to do. So I made one of my favorite bakes, which is just a simple apple muffin, and then I made two variations kind of similar to it, but I will talk more about that in my little baking clips. So I think without further ado, let's just get started. So see you in a bit. So this is me cutting up all the fruit that I need for the muffins that I'm making. I am using my kind of base recipe that I always use when I make apple cinnamon muffins, and then I'm just switching out the apples with pear and then also one with rhubarb, as you can see here, just to try something new. And I really love rhubarb and my boyfriend loves pear, so I felt like that would be fitting to try those out. So now I'm just putting all of the ingredients together and I'm mixing 3 bowls at a time so that I will have all the muffins ready at the same time to go in the oven together. I look so concentrated when I do this. I didn't even realize. I look so angry. It looks like I hate it, but I actually love baking, but it doesn't look like it. There I am, smiling. So now I'm just mixing up the first one. I believe that the first one I finished was the pear one. Yes, it was the pear one, as you can see. So now we have the first one down and we have 2 to go. And I decided to do them off camera. So here we see me putting the batter into the baking forms. These ones that I have are actually from the brand that I work for, called Miss Etoile. We don't produce them anymore, but I do have a lot of. And they have like this inner coating that makes the cake let go of the forms really easily. So all of the cake will basically let go of the form, and I don't know how they do it. It's magic, but I love it, and these are the only baking forms that I use. So the day when I run out will be a sad day. But now I'm just getting them ready to go in the oven. Have a nice bake. I am back with my bakes. I have them all here on my little plate. Before I get into actually tasting what I made, I also wanted to introduce the theme for this month, which is why fantasy is my favorite. I decided, since I went with with one of my favorite bakes, maybe I should also talk a little bit about my favorites, and especially what it is about the fantasy genre that just wheels me in. So that will be the theme. Hopefully I'll explain well why it is fantasy that I gravitate towards, because I have actually been asked quite a lot why fantasy is my favorite genre, especially from people I know like in my everyday life. Also because fantasy isn't really the genre in Denmark that is most popular, so you won't be able to find like adult fantasy or a lot of YA fantasy. I mean, the only age group where fantasy is more normal in Denmark is middle grade. So it is not the genre that you will see most often in Denmark, but it is my favorite, and I will talk a little bit about why. But before we do that, I think we should try one of the muffins. I'm really intrigued by this rhubarb thing because I've never made anything with rhubarb before, so let's try it. Fun fact, I do know how to say rhubarb in Italian, and that is rubarbaro, I think. And why do I know that? I know it because my mom used to live in Italy, so she speaks Italian. And whenever we go there, she just teaches us random words. And then for some reason, either we had something with rhubarb in it, or we talked about how much I love rhubarb, because I do. But for some reason, we ended up talking about that word, and I just remember it because it feels so good to say. It's like rubarbaro. Nice. As you can hear, it's all the important words that I know. Let's try. That's really good. Not to toot my own horn or anything, but that's really good. So let's get into what this video is actually about, and that is why fantasy is my favorite genre. The very simple answer to that question is because it is so different from what happens in real life. It's like an escape into a different realm, into a entirely different place where I can be anything. And I guess that I really like that, and also why I don't go for contemporaries anymore is because it feels too close to reality, which I also know that it is. But to me, a story about someone who gets promoted or something, that is just not interesting to me. It feels too mundane and too much like everyday life. Currently, I am in a very set schedule for throughout the week. Like, I wake up, I go to work, I get home, I make food every other day. Then I have like a couple of hours that I can spend doing whatever. Usually it's reading or playing Planet Zoo, playing Sims, or watching some kind of TV show. So it's very the same thing that's going on every single day. And sometimes it's just really nice to sit down with a book where there's dragons and there's sword fighting and there is a bunch of things happening, and you cannot predict what every single thing will be because the possibilities are endless. There can be a brand new creature that we've never heard about before that will be introduced, and just the excitement of that, I feel like that is one of the main reasons why fantasy is one of my favorite genres, or is my favorite genre. It's not one of them, it is my favorite genre. The escape from reality and the ability to be in a different realm where everything is made of ice, or in a desert country, or I can go anywhere in my books and I can be anyone. I can experience any type of magic. Like, magic is really something where I'm just like, oh, why is it not real? I want that. Also, the idea of wearing dresses all the freaking time and castles and fighting with bow and arrow and swords instead of guns. I love it. Recently, I also read a urban fantasy. I apologize for the change in quality. My camera is acting up. So here we are. What I was saying was that I recently read a urban fantasy, which is to me very, very different from a regular fantasy in the sense that this is actually what I ask for, because I want to be in these fantasy worlds and I can't because they don't exist. But with an urban fantasy, all of the fantastical elements are kind of introduced into the real world. So why is it that I don't like urban fantasy that much? I really don't know. I think it's the fact that I want the bow and arrow, I want the sword, I want the castle, and usually when it's urban fantasies, it's somebody living in a regular house and they have a phone and they have a car, and no thanks. I don't know why I don't want to say I'm against it, but it's not my favorite thing. There's that. Urban fantasy is like an exception to the rule because I really, really love fantasy in general. And then urban fantasy is where I'm like, maybe not. As I mentioned, the thing with fantasy is the escapism, kind of like being able to follow these characters that are in a completely different situation than I am, and the world building is usually phenomenal, and I can experience this in a way that I probably wouldn't think that much about it if it was just a contemporary. I am comparing it to contemporary because it is one of my least favorite genres, and it kind of makes sense to talk about them. I feel like the reasons that I love fantasy is similar to the reasons why I don't like contemporary. Contemporary is too, as I said, mundane for me. There is a lot of different genres in between that I'm still trying to explore, but contemporary is the one that I can say no thank you, I don't want that. And fantasy is definitely the one where I'm like, give me everything. Before I continue, let's have a break and let's try the next one. This is a pear and vanilla muffin. Let's see what we think. Let's try. This is so good. Delicious. So far, I prefer the rhubarb one actually, but the pear one was also really nice. The thing with also Denmark and fantasy books is that it is not the biggest genre at all. The biggest genre in Denmark that you can find and that everybody seems to read is crime. That is the most popular genre, and when you go to a bookstore in Denmark, the majority will be crime books, and then you would have stuff like historical fiction, fantasy, sci-fi will all be placed together. So basically all genres not crime related will be placed together on a separate shelf. I don't mind that at all, but it's just to say that when I talk about fantasy and my love for fantasy books in Denmark, it's usually met with why? Because you don't really learn anything from it. It's not like, it seems to be something that kids read. It is more, oh, but dragons, why would you read about that? That's for kids. And I'm like, not really. Not the type of dragons I read about. Sometimes it's kind of annoying that people tend to say that I don't read real books because I like fantasy more than crime, I don't know, doesn't mean that I don't read real books. There is a lot to learn from fantasy, like maybe not one-to-one life situations, but more like underlying themes and camaraderie and the importance of friendships and alliances and staying true to who you are in spite of tough decisions and stuff like that. There's a lot of things to learn from fantasy books that, yes, you can also learn in other books, but I feel like that is also a big part of why I love fantasy, because even though I cannot relate to the situations that the main character is in, to some extent I can still understand and get the message and be like, okay, so if I am in a tough situation, maybe I should take inspiration from, let's say, Juliet and act this way and show my strengths and be strong and whatever in spite of what the world tells me to be. I feel all philosophical. I could really go on and on about why fantasy is the superior genre in my world and why I will probably never switch it up. Well, never is a strong word. If I can help it, I will probably not switch it out for any other genre because fantasy is just, my jam. Fantasy middle grades are very easy to find in Denmark. That is the majority you can find. You can also find a lot of sports, especially soccer related middle grades, and you can find a lot of horse related middle grades. I don't read either. I read fantasy, and especially with the fantasy middle grades, they're kind of translating a lot more middle grades into Danish, which is nice because some of the ones that I have read and liked has now been translated, which means that I will be able to read them to my nieces because I am going to be reading fantasy books to my nieces. I don't care. But that is also, as I said, the norm is that fantasy is for kids. That is kind of like the thing in Denmark. And then of course, I'm not saying everybody's like that because I know that there's other people like me in Denmark who lives for fantasy and just wants all of it. I just wish that it weren't, I'm not gonna say it's looked down upon, but a little bit. It's kind of like saying your favorite movies are Disney. It's the same thing to some Danish people that I've met. It's like saying, oh, one of my favorite movies, it's an animated movie. As soon as you say your favorite movie is an animated movie, people are like, why? That's for kids. And it's the same reaction I get when I say that my favorite genre is fantasy. It's like, why? It's for kids. And I'm like, it's not, but fight me. I just like the escapism and the fact that I can travel to any kind of world, maybe even a world similar to ours, but because of this one event that happened, it is completely different. Maybe even an urban fantasy where I can go to Chicago and there will be monsters there, or I can go to Copenhagen and there will be a dragon resting underneath the royal castle. The possibilities are endless, and to be completely honest, it is just all I want. I want the fantasy element because that is what helps with the escapism, because I read to detach, and it is much easier for me to detach when it is something that couldn't happen to me at all. I know that there's a lot of genres, for example, sci-fi, horror, paranormal, that probably won't happen. I don't know why I said properly, but that probably won't happen to me. I'm gonna go back to the bow and arrow in this one because my dream, when I picture myself in like a fantasy realm, I will be that girl. I will be, oh, what's her face? Susan Pevensey from Narnia. That will be me. I want it. I want to be running through the woods in my dress with a bow and arrow, showing no mercy. I want it. And on that note, I think it's time for the last cake. This is the one that I've actually tried before. This is my favorite. Or, well, I don't know. This is an apple cinnamon muffin. Usually I make it with also like a buttercream on top, but I didn't feel like doing it today. Let's have a taste. It's still my favorite. Anything with cinnamon, give me. It's really good. Okay, so the winner of the muffins is definitely the cinnamon one. I think on like a final note for the whole fantasy thing and why it's my favorite, I also want to say that, for example, with, let's say, The Prison Healer, I recently read it and it's one of my new favorites. There are so many things in that has this, obviously, the fantastical element, but also the way that the prison is built. I know we could also follow a prison in like a contemporary story, but it wouldn't be the same because it's too realistic to me. I don't want it. But also the trials, like people aren't really put through trials in the same way that you would be in a fantasy book. People are not like, let's see if you're worthy of escaping this prison by fighting to survive in these crazy trials that we made. Oh yeah, let's try that. That does not happen. And I want the high stakes, and I rarely find it in anything but not contemporary. I don't find it in contemporary at all. But I want the really high stakes, and I want the adventure. I want the found family. Yes, we can also have found family in other genres, but obviously all of what I'm saying we can have in other genres, but I want it all together, and I want the atmosphere of the forest, living in like a tiny cottage or living in a castle. I want it, I got it. I want it, I got it. But no, there is a lot, of course, about the fantasy genre that I want and that I like. And I feel like I've also talked a lot about how it is not accepted in a way that I wish it was in Denmark, and that as soon as you reach like a certain age, maybe in your 20s, I feel like people are expecting you to read more realistic books, and I don't see why, because whether or not it's realistic or unrealistic like fantasy, it's all fiction in the end. So I don't see why this genre is more intelligent or more correct to read at a certain age and fantasy is not. Of course, it is my opinion because fantasy is my go-to genre. It is where I feel happy and it is what I gravitate towards. So of course I feel like that. I think somebody who reads crime would probably see another side of the story and be like, yes, but the things that happen in my book could potentially happen or have been inspired by true events. Fantasy books are not inspired by true events. Let's just be real about that. It's just the fantasy element. Obviously the fantastical, the whimsical, the, as I said, the high stakes and the full-on battlefield war scenes. Like there's so many things that I love about it, and the fact that it is not as widely accepted in Denmark. Or not accepted, of course, but it is accepted, of course, but it's not the norm. I just wish it was. I wish it was. I think I've talked a lot now about my fantasy genre and why I love it, so I think I'm gonna head out now. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you liked this. Please leave down in the comments if there's anything you would like me to talk about. I already have a long list of subjects that I want to try and discuss, so if you have anything that you would like me to touch upon, then please let me know down in the comments. Also, if you have like a recipe that you want me to try and make, let me know. Also, if you just want to let me know that you're here but don't really have anything you want to say, you can always leave a green heart. If you like this video, please hit the like icon, and if you want to see more of my bookish content, please consider hitting that subscribe button. It would mean the world to me. And until I see you next time, bye!